So, lots to dig into with our party insiders. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Okay. What do we make of I feel like dancing to YMCA? Good. But, Fred, they met behind closed doors, the three leaders, without staff at all, which was at the U.S.'s request, I'm told. And that's all we know. A good meeting. They're going to keep working together on Kuzma. Full stop, period. Does it mean anything for the big relations?
Who knows? Maybe in an hour we'll get the whole deal announced. We have no idea.
Yeah, could be.
This is what I will note of this is the fact that I think this is the first time that the Prime Minister has met with the President that we didn't get some kind of expectation raised coming out of whether it was staff or communications folks in the government somewhere or in the ministries. In the past, when they have these meetings, there seems to be something. Oh, we think we're close to this. We're thinking close. I didn't hear anything on that front. So at least maybe
because they're not close to anything. It seems. Right?
It's either that or they're tightening up their communications and their internal discipline on this, which is an interesting sign if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, what's your sense of it? It seems like you got to go to all of these things to have the face time with Trump to maintain the relationship and hope it unlocks something, right? But I don't know if it did or not because nobody seems to know if it did or not. So what do you know?
Not much, as my family would tell me.
Yeah.
But to Fred's point about in October, that visit, it was a success until you compared it by what was being leaked in terms of their expectations. And I think that was a big learning experience for a lot of folks. During this week, I was told several times that they don't even know how long that Trump and our Prime Minister might see each other. There's, if there's something on the edges. And I thought that was good in terms of spin, but I also thought it was good because we all know that Trump can't resist sometimes these, he seems to actually really like Mark Carney. And let's look at some other things in terms of how things are going for President Trump right now. He's had to acknowledge that his tariffs are hurting the economy. His polls are just terrible. He's got a Secretary of Defense where there's a lot of allegations around war crimes.
That is an issue.
Hugely bad.
That is an issue.
The director of the FBI, apparently, you can enhance your relationship with your girlfriend by getting to go on private planes and having, FBI agents walk their friends home. And then if you look at even this week, a really, a win that they did have, the Republicans did have, was not by the margins that they should have had. And previously we've seen this. So, and then you have Donald Trump falling asleep during a cabinet meeting. So the Donald Trump of this month is December versus, say, February are very different animals in that I don't think people are as scared of Donald Trump as they were, and they know that politically he's weak and getting weaker. So I'm not surprised that Trump wanted to chat with him. And do not make any of us do that dance on TV, and please don't play it while I'm control room. Do not put that dance up.
Yeah, it feels like YMCA stands for you must capitulate to America, because that's sort of the position. But, as Greg outlined, Mel, there's an erosion of the political support for Trump. I don't know if that's better for Canada or if, cornered animals fight harder. It seems it is opaque and difficult to predict right now. It seems like it's in a static position.
And I think what you started to say there is typically when he's in a tough spot, that's usually when things kind of go haywire a little bit, and we get shots and we're not really sure what's happening, almost as a distraction. Sometimes it feels that way. Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? I think the fact that they are able to have conversations that are friendly is probably good, but again, we're almost a year in. We haven't had any relief. So is it good? Is it bad? I think it all depends on how the president feels that day. And unfortunately, I think Canadians are starting to have, I don't know how to say that, but they're tired of waiting to see what this man's going to do.
Yeah, there's a fatigue there.
Fatigue, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we were right about 1 year since Justin Trudeau's plane went to Mar-a-Lago, and we tracked it. And you remember that was a Friday where things went sideways. So anyway, we'll wait and see. The Prime Minister may do a public event at some point during the show. He may say something. If he does, we'll try to get that for you. But let's talk about things we do know for sure. There was a minor cabinet shuffle this week after Prime Minister Mark Carney lost a cabinet minister over his pipeline memorandum with Alberta. But while Stephen Guilbeault took a stand against against the deal. It appears Canadians are largely standing behind it. Polls from the Angus Reid Institute suggest 60% of Canadians support a new pipeline to the BC coast, 25% oppose it. And Abacus data has similar findings. Nationally, 55% support it, while 18% oppose it. Now, both polling firms also found a majority of British Columbia residents are supportive of a pipeline. So, Greg, this is where you take your victory lap from a week ago, where you said the move to the centre was what they needed. There's still some issues they're dealing with, but this is an interesting data set for the Prime Minister and his backers on this. What do you make of it?
I'm not as surprised, because there has been polling this year that has indicated this. There was a Nanos poll in April. The Privy Council office was polling near the end of June around this, and that would be data that the Prime Minister and his advisors would have. Yep. There's been other polls, I think one in July, I think one in September. And I think it reflects, Mel, you have mentioned several weeks about the affordability, and people are still very worried about that. Mm-hmm. And so this may be that people in Canada are looking to see what else can we do that we haven't been trying in the last little while, and if we're going to go in this direction. In terms of the Liberal caucus, obviously, they lost a cabinet minister over this. There's other members of caucus that are speaking about this. The other thing, though, here is, there's something for everyone around the MOU. There's either a pipeline or there's not, what you want to do. But there's also a message here for the private sector that, if you've gotten a win here, there are some expectations that when this pipeline is built, the way you build it, the way it's going to be handled, expectations are very high, and you need to live up to this. Canadians have decided, we see by polling, the government has decided to pursue this. But it's not just the federal government or the Premier of Alberta. The private sector has a big role here to make sure that you are building confidence and trust in Canadians when you go, if this does indeed go ahead. Yeah, if it does indeed go ahead, because it's a bit like Schrodinger's pipeline right now, Mel, in that, there's the potential for this, but Pathways is contingent on it. It's a theoretical pipeline. The Conservatives have a motion coming next week to force the Liberals to vote on the precise wording of the Memorandum of Understanding, because you've got people in British Columbia and Quebec who aren't comfortable with the pipeline, and they're trying to wedge them by showing that maybe not everyone's behind it, and this is all a ruse by the Liberals. What do you make of that move?
The games we play in the House are the games we play in the House, I think. I appreciate, and you know what, to give credit to Conservatives, they are actually quite good at making those awkward moments in the House. Not
more awkward.
No, totally, but not
weaponizing them.
100%, and not in a, this is actually going to be useful for us when we go talk to Canadians on the doorstep. I don't think that actually helps, but in a putting Liberals against Liberals, they did it well with us, putting NDP against NDP, in the last Parliament. They have these trick things where if you're smart, you just vote no and everybody votes no, but, people have egos and they want to be seen to support or not support certain thing, and people usually, or the Conservatives usually do a good job at getting people to walk into the trap that they've laid. Now, does it work for real people? I don't think so. I don't think real folks are paying attention to the Opposition Day motion and seeing what people are saying on this. I will say, though, the more you talk about whether or not this is not a real pipeline, but whether this happens or not, I think that's what the conversation is going to cement around. Mm-hmm. The more we've talked about this MOU, the more the Prime Minister has talked about this, the more that the Premier in Alberta has talked about this, and the less likely we see somebody putting their hand up to help build this pipeline. I think people are going to start quickly realizing that maybe they were sold something that wasn't going to happen. Right. And I think the Prime Minister wears some of that.
Well, Fred, there was a lot of skepticism at Danielle Smith's party convention last week in Edmonton. She got booed when she talked about, I hope this proves that, Canada works for Alberta. She didn't get booed. The idea that she presented got booed. And what do you make of this move? It's because as the Conservatives keep trying to say the Liberals aren't serious about this, and this is a fake MOU, they're kind of undermining Danielle Smith a little bit too, right? Because she's the other signature.
Well, I think it's interesting to see where are the Liberals on this, or I don't think it's necessarily a game the Conservatives are playing here. I think it's an opportunity. Where is the Liberal Party on this? They're the governing party right now. They're the ones who signed this MOU. Let's see what MPs actually stand up and say we support it, because they're using the wording from the MOU. And what's interesting about the polling, the polling has showed us for a very long time that Canadians support pipelines. However, if you do an actual dive into the polls, both Abacus and Angus Reid tell us 1/3 of people who voted Liberal in the last election are opposed to pipelines.
Right. And the tanker ban is the other thing.
Well, that's how it all comes together,
that's
right?
Another thing, right?
54% of people who voted Liberal in British Columbia opposed to the pipeline. Léger Marketing has a poll out today. The Bloc Québécois lost by 15 points in the election. They're tied today. Like, this is not, yes, Canadians aren't supportive of pipelines. Liberal voters aren't at the same number that you may think they are.
Right, so
that puts them at risk.
So this is my question. We talked a bit about this last week. The math on this, because Shachi Curl with the Angus Reid Institute said that in the lower mainland of British Columbia, the Liberals are down 15 points. Now, some of that is bleed to the Conservatives on crime in places, in Surrey and Richmond and those areas and cost of living. But then there's the anti-pipeline, environmentalist progressive vote in British Columbia. And the Léger polling in Quebec would suggest potential risk in the C count there. So you get better seconds in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but still second, right? Is that what the math tells us? How do you read it?
It is a major risk. The Liberal coalition is built currently on eating the progressive vote. It ate NDP and Bloc vote in the last election. That is at major risk right now, where it could go back, and it only needs to go up a few points to the NDP and the Bloc to lose a ton of Liberal seats.
So Greg, how do you see it? Because look, the Léger poll, which was done for the National Post, it's 43-36, I believe, top line numbers. Liberals, Conservatives, 7-point lead for the Liberals is a smashing runaway majority. In a normal voting period, but you get into the regional splits, depending on what it does in BC and certainly Quebec, right? That's where the volatility is. I mean, what's the level of concern? Is there a level of concern there, or has this just not settled enough? Is it not firm? What do you see?
Well, that 7-point lead, the headline in the National Post today was a slim lead, which is curious because the
7 points is not slim.
Well, and to be fair to the reporter who actually wrote that, he doesn't use that phrase anywhere. It's the headline.
Yeah.
And just I want to remind people on Twitter before they get too exercised, reporters do not write their own headlines. Fred's example here about, if that Liberal vote is unhappy and if it goes to the, where does it go? If it goes to the NDP, maybe it helps you in those blue-orange splits, but I'm not sure right now that's something that I would be counting on if I was advising Pierre Poilievre, that this, bad for Liberal might not be good for, the Conservatives, because if your party actually supports pipelines, you can't take too much joy in that this is bad for the Liberals. Unless all you want to do is be in opposition and oppose all the time. Do you really want pipelines to be built? That's a challenge. And to Mel's point about how much the Prime Minister will wear, I'm trying to remember what the amount of the money that Danielle Smith announced to prepare a project. Was it 70 million? To come up for something like this. I think there could be an upside, or this could be very clever politics by the Prime Minister, where I've given you what you wanted, and you say that there's going to be a proponent out there, so where is it? And it's not, I'm not sure it's his job.
Maybe in managing the relationship with Alberta, but voters in Quebec and BC is what I wonder about, Mel. I see the Bloc numbers as the bigger threat here than the Conservative numbers to the Liberals, because if you bleed 10 seats out of Quebec and lose a couple in the Lower Mainland.
But I'm saying if it doesn't happen,
sure.
What does he wear there? He said to Alberta, "This is what you've wanted.
Right.
No one's coming forward. So is it status quo?"
But Mel, the concern I heard from progressive Liberals to get you in is that they're going to get all of the hit of approving of a pipeline without the economic benefit of a pipeline. That's the risk, right?
The whole election, everything the NDP and the Conservatives tried to say about Carney would not stick because people didn't know him yet. They thought he was a progressive champion because he spent time, in the ecosystem. They thought they desperately needed to believe him to be who they wanted him to be, that they were willing to kind of forget the stuff around. I think now, when you sign this, you've very clearly showed your cards that you are going to find a way to make it work with Alberta to build a pipeline. That is a clear signal to folks in places like Toronto, to folks in places like British Columbia, to folks in places like Montreal, Halifax, a bunch of places that that orange-red vote is really alive. I think you're really clearly telling those folks where you stand on this issue. And this is an issue that, Elizabeth May was eclipsed in 2019 because the Liberals were so solidly thought of as climate champions. And that that goes away. That completely goes away.
Well, and those issues you outlined there makes this vote on Tuesday really interesting, because you have to go on the record and say what you've done.
Yep.
And Elizabeth May feels betrayed by this, and so she won't vote for them in future comments. So that's an interesting issue. But look, there's something else that may be a consequence of this. This is something Stephen Guilbeault said to my colleague Rosemary Barton. He says the pipeline deal with Alberta is not only bad for the environment, it may also fuel separatism in Quebec. Here he is speaking with Rosie for an interview that's going to air on Sunday.
There is clearly a sentiment by some Albertans that they don't see themselves in the Federation. But we also have to be careful, because we have a very strong separatist movement in Quebec. And it's not just a movement, it's a political party, it's won elections, it's done 2 referendums. The PQ's been leading for the last 30 months in the polls in Quebec, and they have said that they will hold a 3rd referendum. And there is a feeling right now that by abandoning our climate goals, we are fueling the separatist movement, which is using this, and we can see it in the House of Commons this week with many questions from the Bloc Québécois, but also comments here in Quebec. We are fueling the Quebec separatist movement. So I don't think, as a federation, we gain by trying to appease using a solution that failed before. We're trying to appease separatist movement in part of the country by fueling them in another part of the country.
So Fred, it's an interesting analysis, and I don't know enough, about the mood and the feel of Quebec sovereigntists. But he says the solution that failed before is the TMX pipeline, where they bought and built it and lost all their seats, right? It didn't gain. So I mean, what do you make of that? What you're hearing from Stephen Guilbeault? I think that speaks to how fraught this may be.
Well, it's what, we're heading into an election year in Quebec where the PQ are way ahead of the polls, and they're ahead of the polls almost by default, because the CAQ, the governing party, has just run its course. Yeah. But now there's a sense that they have a narrative that they can build off now, that they can actually run on something and show how, in their view, Quebec or Canada isn't working for them. So there's an argument, I think, that he's making, that it's giving them a narrative now that they can run on here about what the problems are. And that is obviously a concern in that regard. Now, most Quebecers actually do support pipelines. So it's about how is the story being told? My thing is, going into this election year and a possible referendum, is who's Captain Canada now in this? Who's going to lead the charge from the Quebec side for Canada? I don't know who that person is, who that personality is. We're seeing it on the separatist side. It's growing. You have the leader of the PQ, you have Blanchette. I don't know who the federal person is.
Well, by default, it has to be the Prime Minister, right? You cannot outsource national unity. And
that is hard when we have a Prime Minister whose French isn't as strong as other Prime Ministers, who doesn't have the link to Quebec of other Prime Ministers. We've had Quebec federal leaders every time there was a federal Prime Ministers, every time there's been a referendum. We won't next time. So that shifts I think hopefully we need to identify who the Federalist is.
We won't next time? Is there a date picked or something that I don't know?
Well, I mean...
there's no Quebec Prime Minister for in the next year?
Well, in the next year.
Right, but Mr. Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the PQ leader, Mel, he's the lead is profound, right? Unless Pablo Rodriguez, who's going through some troubles in the Quebec Liberal Party, rebounds, that's where it appears to be headed, and he's promised a referendum within a year. So we're looking at 2027. So there would need to be a pretty significant shake-up at the national level. But how does the federal government respond to this? Because there was a lot of skepticism in Alberta about the MOU, and obviously there's some problems there. And as I understand it from people like Chantal Hébert, it's not so much a pipeline far away BC. It's like, where are we on climate as a country? That's driving things there. How do they respond to those concerns before it gets away?
Where are we as a country on climate? And you're having to pick winners and losers, and Quebec sees that, right? Quebec sees that BC is being picked as a loser to advantage Alberta. So then what does that mean? So I think that also has an underlying, that's pushing that sentiment a little bit in that province. So what does the government do? It's hard because they've just lost Stephen Guilbeault as a champion. You mentioned Pablo Rodriguez. He's going through a lot right now. And of course, when you're talking to Quebecers, there's obviously a lot of Quebecers who don't want to separate. But in a wave of this is what people are talking about, you kind of do need a champion. And who is that? I don't know that it's going to be Joel Lightbound. I don't think that he has the ability to do that in the same way that folks trusted other Liberals in Quebec. It's hard because you also don't want to mess around in what's going to happen in Quebec either. You kind of have to let those electors decide. So how do you fix things unless you have a climate plan, unless you start talking about what it is that you are going to do? And again, even if you do that, you've kind of clipped yourself a little bit because folks won't believe you as much as they would have prior to the MOU. The interesting thing, I think, as part of all of this is we talked about a little bit how they're sharpening their communications a little bit. They're not necessarily setting expectations. But on this issue, it seems like they've failed to do the number one thing that we advise our clients to do all the time. You have to build champions. You have to figure out who it is that's on your team that's going to spread the good word of why you're doing things. And they seem to just be doing stuff and not necessarily figuring out where do they need to make sure that they've got people echoing their message in a way that brings those folks on board too.
Precisely. And Greg, what we just saw there from Mr. Guilbeault, still a Liberal MP, still in the caucus, still supports the Prime Minister broadly overall. He's not spreading the gospel of the MOU and of the new plan, right? So I'm sure Mr. Guilbeault would not sit out a sovereignty referendum. He would be one of the champions, but it is a tough situation when that's the message of one of your best-known Quebec MPs.
Yeah, and not to relitigate 1995, but at the time, Chantal Hébert wrote an excellent book on this. There was no game planned. There were other people besides Jean Chrétien that were involved in this. There was a team.
Charest was the PC leader.
So there are other, and I was at the referendum rally. I really hope we don't go through that again. But we're forgetting some context here. You talked about 2019. It's not 2019. I sat here for about a year and a half where we talked about the carbon pricing. And what happened to that? We've lost the consensus in Canada that climate change, it's gone from something that we have to address to something nice to address because of the economy.
It's moved down the list of
But you can still in that polling that we saw, right? It still says we should be fighting the climate crisis.
I defended carbon pricing week after week after week on this, and we all know what the end result was. I sucked at it.
It's your fault, actually.
I personally lost this. It was up to me. But I don't want to.
Can we super him as Greg McEachern killed carbon pricing?
but it's again, we can't just tell one story at a time and then only half the story. So there is a difference right now. We've just talked about a year of polling that shows that Canadians have moved on their attitudes towards pipelines. Let's not just say that this is just it's totally gone away. That people, I want people to care about the climate.
I get that, but it plays differently in different regions, right? You know what I mean?
I'm from a province that's hanging on by fingernails, to New Brunswick. I absolutely get it. But at some point, because of the economy, because of the pandemic, Canadians moved on to other priorities.
It's true. Environment has dropped down on the list of priorities on where it was a hot issue. But it's one of those things that will come back as soon as the economy gets, whenever that happens, whenever things are straightened on that front, it will come up. And I think Liberals have lost credibility if they're trying to get that voter coalition.
But I still think, if we were looking at, I think it was in the Abacus polling, you still saw, if you ask the question, should we be fighting, doing everything that we can to fight the climate crisis, the response is yes. The only time that it's no is if it gets in the way of affordability, if it gets in the way of the economy, right? So people still, from a general starting point, want us to tackle the climate crisis. It's just the then what or what if where people are less so as important as it is, unless if it's making my life more expensive or if it's making my life harder.
We should do it unless it's difficult, but that's a problem because it requires collective action and sacrifice to deal with it.
And that's not leadership.
We shouldn't take from that people just have stopped caring. I think people still care.
Right. It's dropped on the priority list of what they're concerned. And when they're voting right now, though, they are more worried about affordability and crime and other issues. So, but it will be back up there at some point, and it's about credibility, about who can talk about it then.
Can I just say I love the evolution of this, that we now have Greg saying carbon pricing and climate, move it down, Fred saying, oh no, it's coming back, it's so important. I just want to say, I know. But and we're out of time, but I think it's interesting. The 1995 referendum, I was thinking about this because of what Mr. Guilbeault said, and I spoke to Jean Charest earlier. Monoculture, mainstream media dominant, no social media, whole different ball game. foreign interference, manipulation of algorithms, fake news, AI in a binary yes/no.
Yeah.
That is something I don't know if the political class is prepared for, and that's my big concern going ahead.
Just thinking, when we're looking at polling, we're talking about separatism and all this. Like, polling is where the puck is right now, not where it's going to be, and things could move violently.
But you look at something like Brexit, algorithms and data manipulation shifted it.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that in a Canadian election with paper ballots, regionalism, multi-party systems. It's not a yes/no. Referendums, yes/no.
Yeah,
And that's a whole
Quebec
different
has
thing.
a whole
Yeah.
star system culture that the rest of Canada doesn't even begin to understand.
Yeah, and just how that plays in, we shall see. We'll talk about that in 2027.
Yeah.
All right, we'll book that for another day. Got to say goodbye to our Friday Political Pulse. Melanie Richer, Greg McEachern, and Fred Delory. Love it every week.